Thanks a lot, Renee. To get things going, there's been a tremendous amount of research on personality and health outcomes. And there's a number of age-related health outcomes, including chronic disease, quality of life, longevity itself, cognitive function, and Alzheimer's disease, that have reliable trait correlates. Well, what personality traits are we talking about? There's a few major players. They vary somewhat depending on the health outcome. One is conscientiousness. It's one of the big five, which everyone has probably heard of. And this is like self-discipline, reliability, goal striving. It's very closely aligned with the science behavior change target of self-regulation in the behavioral domain. Another big one is neuroticism, and there we can think about affective self-regulation. So again, a self-regulation type construct, but more so in the affective domain. And probably that dispositional component that Dave was speaking of in terms of stress reactivity. And there's several others as well. They're both broad traits like the big five, as well as more specific traits. Impulsivity is an example. And the big five themselves are compound traits. A lot of people don't realize this, but they're actually composites of several specific traits. And there's increasing evidence that those specific component traits may be differentially related to different outcomes. So there's really a lot on the playing field. Now, many personality traits that are responsible for age-related health outcomes result from early life adversity. As I said, they often play an integral role in the stress response process that you just heard about. And given all the data that's come out, especially in the last 2 decades or so, the logical question is, what do we do with this information? So just like Dave and Eric said, we've established this association. What can we actually do? There's a bit of a translational gap out there in this area. This has led to work on personality-informed interventions. And the interest here is in leveraging personality information in interventions broadly defined. Now, there was a NIA work group on conscientiousness led by Liz Nielsen and David Reese that put out a series of papers in developmental psychology with a special issue in 2014 where some of these ideas were fleshed out. And there's a current effort underway as well, a new work group led by Lisa Onken on efforts to directly change specific traits in hopes of gaining long-term health benefits. There's a lot of issues involved in targeting specific traits or elements of personality for change. Some of these are discussed in the papers in that special issue. So if you're targeting a specific trait, that's one way to go about it. Another approach in terms of using personality information is to leverage the predictive information that's encoded in traits to inform medical care and prevention. So in other words, there's a long tradition within personality of showing that traits or various dispositional constructs have predictive power for consequential life outcomes, including health. This has been a major effort in personality psychology. And so coincidentally, there's also a zeitgeist in medicine right now that's actually been going on for a while towards increasing personalization, individualization, and precision in predicting your risk of developing various diseases, various health outcomes, responding to different treatments, and so forth. And that's known right now as personalized medicine. You hear that term a lot. It's permeating the media as well, so it's not just a technical term anymore in genomics, for instance. And the idea behind it is that you want to predict somebody's risk of a particular health outcome, a heart attack, developing cardiovascular disease, a certain type of cancer, or responding to particular treatment for a disease, a certain drug for cancer, for instance. And you want that to be as individualized and specific to that given patient as possible. So in other words, you don't want to have to rely on really crude estimates just based on general demographics. You're a woman of this particular age, and so your risk of developing breast cancer is the average for that particular age strata. You're a man, again, your age is whatever it is, well, the best chance of getting a decent risk estimate from a practicing physician, you would basically get some prevalence estimate within, a particular age decade. So these are very crude risk estimates that have been used for years and years, and so the idea here is that we can be better than this. We can take characteristics of the individual into account in order to achieve some improved prediction. Now, and of course that helps guide early intervention and prevention efforts and so forth. And it facilitates decisions by treatment providers as well as the patient's behavior and expectations and so forth. So accurate predictions is a good thing in long-term health. Now, personalized medicine has primarily been the province of genomics. That's where the term originated. It's almost used synonymously or exclusively to refer to genomic research, looking at candidate genes that predict health outcomes. There's been an expansion somewhat lately from single candidate genes to larger gene sets that are associated with various health outcomes. This sort of illustrates the point that in risk prediction in medicine, the marker does not actually need to be modifiable, right? So, if you have a certain genotype, a particular polymorphism, not modifiable, right? It doesn't need to be. It just needs to carry some sort of actuarial information about whether or not you're likely to develop the outcome. Along with this sort of new age of genomics, have come a lot of efforts to improve risk prediction models that are sort of old school or have been used for decades, like the Framingham risk score, which Eric mentioned. This is a popular risk prediction model for cardiovascular disease and related outcomes based on whether you smoke, cholesterol, blood pressure, age, gender, these sort of things. And these models are used clinically to assign people a score and then sort of guide treatment. So there's been a tremendous amount of activity on finding candidate genes or novel biomarkers of various sorts that you can add to models like the Framingham that are going to improve its performance drastically. And so in most of these risk models out there, they're not horrible, but they're not great. So there's lots of room for improvement. So these efforts have been pretty widespread, and it's become a very large area of work. Now, the issue with finding all these new markers to add to these classic models is that some of them are costly, others are invasive, and so there's been a lot of pushback, especially from the cost-effectiveness community, on needing to justify the added predictive boost you would get from a particular candidate gene, for instance, with respect to its cost and invasiveness. This is not necessarily the case anymore, but for instance, you use spinal tap to get amyloid metalloprotein for Alzheimer's disease. You also have industry getting involved, patenting. There was recently a lipid panel that predicts Alzheimer's disease. Now it's patented. These things become commercialized, and so they become expensive. So there's sort of a fine line between the added predictive power you actually get from some of these biomarkers and the cost and invasiveness. Now, the idea of personalized medicine has recently transitioned a bit into what's being called precision medicine. And here you can see a quote from the NIH Precision Medicine Initiative. They're trying to build a cohort of 1 million people. And if you notice, I italicized, they're going a little bit beyond genetics now taking into account environment and lifestyle factors. And that broadly encompasses, or can be thought to encompass, a lot of the psychological constructs that we're interested in. And in fact, there's some other bodies involved in this movement too, who believe that any risk factor or marker that could improve the prediction of long-term outcomes will actually help these predictive models. So there's some certain criteria that you would need to meet, and essentially you need to sort of satisfy several goals. You need to show that a psychological construct predicts a consequential outcome beyond information readily available in the clinic, reliably in large samples, over non-trivial time horizons, and concisely and practically. So you need something that can actually be administered in these contexts. I'm going to speed through this a little bit because I'm running low on time. But essentially what we did was a proof of concept study using a fairly basic but widely known risk prediction model called the Charlson Comorbidity Index to predict all-cause mortality over up to a 10-year period. It's somewhat crude. It's based on chronic diseases and demographics. We've looked at the potential utility of several theoretically indicated constructs, a range of personality traits, fluid IQ, social class, and some other things. We did this in over a long time horizon and a large population sample, selected the best risk markers through some intensive cross-validation. There's a small number that actually improved the model, and again, I'm sort of moving through this quickly, but the general idea is that we actually see a fairly substantial improvement in these sort of paper and pencil measures that are very inexpensive and easily administered. And the take-home message is that you don't necessarily need genotype to improve medical risk prediction. Paper and pencil measures of psychological constructs can also do this. I'm going to speed through this. We did this is in psychological methods. It's a subscale from the ICM personality inventory that essentially does the same thing. But the take-home message is that there may be some role for the type of psychological constructs we're interested in the personalized medicine movement. The challenges are primarily implementation and uptake. It's very difficult to walk into a medical setting and get people to just administer your favorite measure. So there's a lot of pragmatic issues at play. However, it seems like a potentially promising area, and there is some proof of concept there now. Thank you.